Trong video ngày hôm nay, chúng ta có những cập nhật thú vị về sự thay đổi của thế giới theo hướng RISC-V của Trung Quốc khi nước này từ bỏ ARM trong ngành công nghiệp chip. Có một công ty hấp dẫn có ảnh hưởng tuyệt đối đến thị Trong video ngày hôm nay, chúng ta có những cập nhật thú vị về sự thay đổi của thế giới theo hướng RISC-V của Trung Quốc khi nước này từ bỏ ARM trong ngành công nghiệp chip. Có một công ty hấp dẫn có ảnh hưởng tuyệt đối đến thị trường chip di động mặc dù không tự sản xuất chip. Công ty này là ARM, một công ty thiết kế kiến trúc chip. Kiến trúc chip đóng vai trò là nền tảng cho chip và ARM phát triển kiến trúc chip cho các nhà sản xuất thiết kế chip để đổi lấy phí. Trong nhiều thập kỷ, ARM đã nắm giữ vững chắc hơn 90% thị trường chip di động thông qua mô hình kinh doanh được ủy quyền của mình. Tuy nhiên, gần đây, các khách hàng lớn đang quay lưng lại với ARM. Ví dụ, Cancom và Mediatek đã phát hành các chip điện thoại di động hàng đầu với những cải tiến đáng kể về hiệu suất. Sau khi từ bỏ phiên bản đại chúng của ARM, GPU, tập đoàn SoftBank, một tổ chức đầu tư mạo hiểm nổi tiếng của Nhật Bản, đã mua lại ARM, gã khổng lồ chip toàn cầu, với giá hơn 30 tỷ đô la Mỹ 6 năm trước. Với việc ARM và Cancom bước vào một cuộc chiến pháp lý và một tài liệu vụ kiện bị lộ, các khách hàng lớn của ARM, bao gồm Cancom và Mediatek, có thể phải đối mặt với tình huống họ phải lựa chọn giữa việc sử dụng bộ sản phẩm ARM hoàn chỉnh hoặc mua giấy phép kiến trúc để phát triển sản phẩm của mình. Chip riêng. Các công ty như Apple, Cancom, Intel, tập đoàn Alibaba, Huawei và một số công ty khởi nghiệp đang đầu tư vào lĩnh vực kiến trúc RISC-V mới nổi. RISC-V mang lại lợi thế là nguồn mở, cho phép tiết kiệm đáng kể phí cấp phép. Tập đoàn SoftBank, vốn có giá trị thị trường giảm mạnh, đã tìm cách bán hoặc niêm yết ARM trong gần một năm. Thương vụ mua lại ARM trị giá 44 tỷ đô la Mỹ của Nvidia đã thất bại. Vào tháng 2, Masayoshi Son, người sáng lập tập đoàn SoftBank, tuyên bố rằng ông sẽ tập trung vào việc niêm yết của ARM thay vì tham dự cuộc gọi hội nghị của SoftBank trong tương lai. Tại thời điểm quan trọng này, nếu doanh thu của các khách hàng lớn lại giảm đáng kể, điều đó chắc chắn sẽ khiến tình hình của ARM trở nên tồi tệ hơn. Tuy nhiên, các công ty Trung Quốc sẽ tìm thấy nhiều cơ hội thị trường hơn. Hoa Kỳ, hiện đã có hai phe do x86 và ARM thống trị, đại diện là Intel và Cancom. Tuy nhiên, Trung Quốc thiếu một hệ thống CPU thống trị của riêng mình. Các nhà phân tích ngành dự đoán rằng trong tương lai, cấu trúc thị trường ở Trung Quốc có thể sẽ liên quan đến x86, ARM và RISC-V, trong đó Trung Quốc trở thành chiến trường chính cho các ứng dụng RISC-V trong 2021. Quy mô thị trường của chip điện toán di động dựa trên cánh tay được dự đoán sẽ đạt 35,1 tỷ đô la Mỹ với Cancom dẫn đầu với chia sẻ doanh thu 34%, tiếp theo là Apple với 31% và Mediatek với 24%. Các nhà phân tích ước tính rằng Cancom bán được khoảng 350 số 0 đến 400 triệu chipset dựa trên lõi ARM mỗi năm, trả cho ARM khoảng 80 xu cho mỗi chipset. Tuy nhiên, bằng cách áp dụng giấy phép, họ có thể tiết kiệm từ 40% đến 50% phí cấp phép. Định giá của ngành bán dẫn toàn cầu đã giảm mạnh trong năm qua, điều này đặt ra thách thức cho các công ty muốn IPO. Ví dụ, Mobile của Intel đã hạ cánh trên Nasdaq vào tháng 10 với giá trị thị trường khoảng 23 tỷ đô la Mỹ, giảm so với 50 tỷ đô la một năm trước. Trong 2016, Sun đã chi hơn 30 tỷ đô la Mỹ để mua lại ARM. Báo cáo tài chính của ARM cho thấy doanh thu của nó trong 2021 sẽ là 2,7 tỷ đô la Mỹ, với lợi nhuận ròng là 1 tỷ đô la Mỹ. Xem xét giá mua ban đầu và khả năng kiếm tiền hiện tại của ARM, thỏa thuận này có vẻ không thuận lợi. Đây có thể là biện pháp cuối cùng để ARM điều chỉnh mô hình kinh doanh và cố gắng mở rộng doanh thu. Nếu khách hàng lớn Cancom trải qua một đợt sụt giảm doanh thu đáng kể khác, điều đó sẽ càng làm xấu đi cơ hội IPO của ARM. Cancom đã công bố lõi CPU tùy chỉnh mới, hay Ion, tại Hội nghị Thượng đỉnh Công nghệ Snapdragon năm 2002. Lõi này được định vị cho nền tảng Snapdragon sóc hiệu suất cao hơn. Các sản phẩm PC chạy Windows Snapdragon tương ứng dự kiến sẽ có mặt sớm nhất vào cuối năm 2023. Các khách hàng lớn dường như đã đạt được sự đồng thuận về việc giảm dần sự phụ thuộc vào ARM, bằng chứng là các chip Mercy M đang cạnh tranh trên thị trường PC. Việc điều chỉnh mô hình kinh doanh của ARM có thể sẽ thúc đẩy nhiều công ty hơn hướng tới trại RISC-V là một công ty tư nhân. Các quyết định của ARM quyết định sự lựa chọn của người dùng. Thế giới đã nằm trong tình trạng kiểm soát vũ khí trong một thời gian dài, trong khi RISC-V nhanh chóng nổi lên như một phe mới nổi. So với các kiến trúc x86 và ARM lâu đời từ 1960 và 1970, RISC-V còn tương đối mới, chỉ có 10 năm lịch sử. Tuy nhiên, bản chất nguồn mở và những lợi thế độc đáo của nó đã thu hút những gã khổng lồ như Cancom và Intel tham gia. Trung Quốc đóng vai trò là chiến trường chính cho các ứng dụng rủi ro V. Theo trang web chính thức của RISC-V Foundation, 80% thành viên cấp cao của tổ chức này đến từ các nhà sản xuất trong nước. Huawei và Alibaba đã ra mắt chip tự phát triển dựa trên kiến trúc RISC-V, ví dụ, Alipintu đã chính thức ra mắt 3 loạt 8 lõi CPU RISC-V bao gồm các thiết bị đầu cuối đám mây, máy tính để bàn và thiết bị di động. So với công ty thương mại, các nhà sản xuất của ARM nắm lấy kiến trúc RISC-V do tính chất nguồn mở của nó, cho phép giảm chi phí và tiết kiệm đáng kể phí cấp phép. Hơn nữa, RISC-V mang đến nhiều sự tự do hơn trong việc tùy chỉnh, cho phép các nhà sản xuất thực hiện những sửa đổi đáng kể. China Bluetooth, một công ty chip tai nghe Bluetooth sẽ IPO trên ban đổi mới khoa học và công nghệ đã chọn kiến trúc RISC-V ngay từ khi thành lập. Quyết định này cho phép họ tránh được phí cấp phép cao, giảm chi phí R&D, cải thiện hiệu suất chi phí chip và tạo điều kiện thuận lợi cho việc phát triển thứ cấp. Trong 2018, Bluetooth đã đạt được lợi nhuận trong năm đầu tiên, một điều đáng chú ý trong ngành bán dẫn. Bản cáo bạch của họ tiết lộ rằng doanh số bán chip của họ trong 2021 đã vượt quá 857,000, tạo ra doanh thu hàng năm hơn 1,1 tỷ, đưa họ trở thành một trong những nhà sản xuất V có rủi ro lớn nhất thế giới. Ngày càng có nhiều công ty thiết kế chip áp dụng kiến trúc RISC-V, tập trung nhiều hơn vào bảo mật. Nếu ARM ngừng cấp phép, đó sẽ là thảm họa đối với các công ty khởi nghiệp về chip vì sẽ rất khó tìm được giải pháp thay thế ngay lập tức cho kiến trúc này. Tuy nhiên, bản chất RISC so với nguồn mở đảm bảo rằng nó sẽ không bị kiểm soát bởi một công ty hoặc quốc gia duy nhất. Tuy nhiên, RISC-V không phải là không có nhược điểm. So với ARM, khoảng cách chính nằm ở hiệu suất và hệ sinh thái. Hiện tại, hơn 90% chip di động trên thế giới sử dụng kiến trúc ARM, kiến trúc đại diện cho phần thống trị của hệ sinh thái ARM. Tuy nhiên, miễn là không có sự phụ thuộc nhiều vào hệ sinh thái ARM, RISC-V sẽ có những cơ hội đáng kể trong lĩnh vực máy chủ. RISC-V cho thấy tiềm năng vượt qua hiệu suất của ARM. Những thách thức có thể được giải quyết nhanh chóng vì hiệu suất có xu hướng bắt kịp nhanh chóng. Khi một công ty khởi nghiệp chọn kiến trúc chip, công ty đó sẽ xem xét các yêu cầu về hiệu suất của chip và mức độ phụ thuộc vào hệ sinh thái phần mềm. Nếu sự phụ thuộc vào hệ sinh thái phần Trong video ngày hôm nay, chúng ta có những cập nhật thú vị về sự thay đổi của thế giới theo hướng RISC-V của Trung Quốc khi nước này từ bỏ ARM trong ngành công nghiệp chip. Có một công ty hấp dẫn có ảnh hưởng tuyệt đối đến thị trường chip di động mặc dù không tự sản xuất chip. Công ty này là ARM, một công ty thiết kế kiến trúc chip. Kiến trúc chip đóng vai trò là nền tảng cho chip và ARM phát triển kiến trúc chip cho các nhà sản xuất thiết kế chip để đổi lấy phí. Trong nhiều thập kỷ, ARM đã nắm giữ vững chắc hơn 90% thị trường chip di động thông qua mô hình kinh doanh được ủy quyền của mình. Tuy nhiên, gần đây, khách hàng lớn đang quay lưng lại với ví dụ, Cancom và Mediatek đã phát hành các chip điện thoại di động hàng đầu vững cải tiến đáng kể về hiệu suất. Sau khi từ bỏ phiên bản đại chúng của ARM, GPU, tập đoàn SoftBank, một tổ chức đầu tư mạo hiểm nổi tiếng của Nhật Bản, đã mua lại ARM, gã khổng lồ chip toàn cầu, với hơn 30 tỷ đô la Mỹ 6 năm trước. Với việc ARM và Cancom bước lý một tài liệu vụ bị lộ, các khách hàng lớn của ARM, bao gồm Cancom và Mediatek, có thể phải đối mặt với tình huống họ phải lựa chọn giữa việc sử dụng bộ sản phẩm ARM hoàn chỉnh hoặc mua giấy phép kiến trúc để phát triển sản phẩm chip riêng. Các công ty như Apple, Cancom, Intel, tập đoàn Alibaba, số công ty khởi nghiệp đang đưa vào lĩnh vực kiến trúc RISC-V mới nổi. RISC-V mang lại lợi thế là nguồn mở, cho phép tiết kiệm đáng kể phí cấp phép. Tập đoàn SoftBank vốn có giá trị thị trường
NVIDIA shares did appear to be up a bit, as you point out.
And Salesforce.
And by the way, the revenue growth rate there is not that far off.
No, the growth rate. And the growth rate's incredible.
The growth rate is incredible.
But look, the convolution. I mean, what's the president going to do about China? Now, China's not as important as it was, but it doesn't matter because everybody in the end is concerned about what the president's going to do. And
you mentioned many times also at the very end of the Biden administration, the new regulations in terms of preventing even allies from accessing certain chips.
Right.
Microsoft, the Journal is reporting, is actively trying to get that changed in the Trump administration.
And so is, yes, I mean, there are 18 friendly countries they were allowed to have unlimited selling. Right. And they're saying, look, maybe that is a little arbitrary, and they're trying to go over with the president's people about how to change those midnight rules that were put together by the Biden administration right at the end of his term. So be aware that there's a lot of moving parts in NVIDIA, no moving parts in Snowflake.
On these tariffs for next week, do we see renewed selling in autos, for example?
Look, I think that Mary Barra put through that accelerated buy and $4 billion other than that because of this. Her stock sells at 4.6 times next year's earnings, which is really unheard of. Well, Bethlehem Steel traded 2 times earnings and then went bankrupt 2 years later. So I don't want to, if your earnings about to collapse, I don't think GM's earnings about to collapse. I think GM's earnings would be very hard to figure out for everybody because you have like Allison Transmissions in Guanajuato, and then it goes back to Monterey, and then it goes back to Texas. I mean, we can't even figure it out. And I think that there's a sense that something has to happen so that we can figure out what it costs to make a call.
Let's get the opening bell here in the CNBC Real-Time Exchange. At the big board this morning, it's beverage company Primo Brands. Includes Poland Spring and Saratoga. At the NASDAQ, 8Co Holdings, an inventory capital provider for e-commerce sellers. Speaking of e-commerce, Watch some eBay at the open this morning, Jim.
Weaker. And that's forecast, because if you look at the actual numbers, you might be very impressed. But when you look at the forecast, they're very downbeat. I think there's a lot. I think people have to understand that the forecast is playing some real havoc here in a lot of names. And there's a lot of people who just say, wait a second, I thought my company was doing well. I didn't think eBay had to be as negative, but they were. I think it's like Sweetgreen.
I was going to say, if you were going to put together a basket on consumer today, you might throw in Sweetgreen, Bed Bath, eBay, and of course earlier in the week, Krispy Kreme, Domino's, you name it.
I wonder whether we're supposed to be thinking about how much business was really, service business was hurt because of California. Because again and again we come back. Hey, by the way, Sempra, a company I like very much, SRE, they were hurt. It was down 20% the other day. Why? Well, because suddenly the Public Utility Holding Commission, out of nowhere, in the last couple of days in California, said, you know what, we have a fire problem here, and take a look at that decline. This is a very good utility. We're just beginning to calculate how bad the wildfires really were for business. Obviously, loss of life.
I mean, and obviously, California, they're trying to calculate a lot of other things as well. I mean, you've got a toxic waste zone basically on the ocean. I've been talking to people there. Just simple things like trying to get around has become even more difficult in terms of commute times and the like. Not to mention, obviously, to your point, there's the economic toll and, most importantly, the human toll. I mean, we haven't talked about them as much, but it's not as though
it's dropped off the radar. It should never have dropped off the radar.
It's going to be, the redevelopment of it is going to be...
It's going to be monumental.
Monumental.
You're absolutely right. But in the meantime...
And even getting how you actually get materials into the area, given the roads, given how difficult it is, particularly that part right along the ocean.
And what do you think about the fact that there were a lot of wealthy people who over-index in the service part of the economy that seem to be just not spending because they don't know what their situation is?
That may be true. Although overall spending continues to be pretty good. I mean, it's the people who are being pressured, those who benefited obviously during, from higher wages and COVID reimbursements and the things of that nature, who have cut their spending. But generally, I think when you talk to bank executives, Jim, it's a pretty good looking picture still in terms of spending overall. The lower cohort obviously is under pressure.
Now, I had thought that Home Depot would have talked about it more in a conference call, and they really didn't address it. I mean, that's where you rebuild. There were many years where there would be, Homestead, Florida, when it was basically wiped out by a hurricane, it was great for Home Depot for a year. Home Depot does not talk about something that is great for them when it's a tragedy. They are not so cavalier to say, wow, we're crushing it in California. They're better than that.
Meantime, a lot of Fed speak's going to be on the tape today. Steve Leisman's got the first batch for this morning. Hey, Steve.
Hey, good morning, Carl. Yeah, some interesting action in Fed probabilities and some interesting Fed speak. Get to that in a second. Markets now pricing in a second cut this year more firmly and earlier. Here are the probabilities. You can see that first cut now, June-ish, July even, more firmly. And then that second cut as early as October, even some pricing in there for September. That had been pushed all the way into January. Kansas City Fed President Schmidt saying now is not the time to let our guard down, kind of talking more hawkishly against these cuts. The Fed needs to become more cautious on inflation because of a sharp rise in inflation expectations. You've seen that in University of Michigan and the Conference Board related to tariff concerns. He says there's an elevated uncertainty that could weigh on growth, creating a bit of a pickle for the Fed, where it could have to balance inflation on the one hand and growth concerns on the other. On a separate matter worth considering, he says the Fed should think about including food into its core inflation reading. So, guys, interesting push me, pull you in this economy right now. This issue of tariffs weighing on inflation on the upside, but all the uncertainty weighing down. The Fed right now cautious and focused, it seems to me, from Schmidt's point of view, on inflation, while the market says, hey, we think the Fed could be in the cutting game more sooner. Carl?
Steve, we got a piece on our website looking at various recession indicators, and yesterday, 3-month 10-year spread made little news. Is the Fed watching that?
I think the Fed's watching everything. I'm also watching, Carl, as you know, these uncertainty indicators, there are economic policy uncertainty indicators, they are at all-time highs, and you have a lot of different conflicting forces out there. You've got forces that suggest maybe we'll have a spurt in growth, and yet all this uncertainty. I'll tell you one thing I'm watching. I'm going to watch business investment. That's going to tell me whether or not the surveys of business optimism are translating into real dollars in the economy, and then watching the consumer sentiment numbers and the spending numbers to see if the decline in sentiment ends up bringing down spending. Those are where the rubber meets the road right there.
Steve, thank you. Steve Liesman.
Interesting, what else? You got bull bear. The bull indicator is the lowest since June 2022. The bear is the highest since September 2022. So you've got, it's reflected everywhere. A level of confusion that's turning into negativity.
Yeah. Guys, I wanted to point something out you don't see every day, which is Warner Brothers Discovery shares up double digits. Not going to see that every day.
Because of debt pay down by $20 billion?
Rarely, if at all. I think the core of the strength in the stock is probably a reflection of the $1.3 billion EBITDA projection they now have for the direct-to-consumer business this year. Remember, of course, there's been so much focus, as there should be, on the streaming efforts of many companies to try to even get in the game with Netflix, which is sort of game, set, and match when it comes to its dominance to a certain extent and its ability to actually garner real free cash flow. But that said, $1.3 billion in line, if not above some estimates out there, and overall for the quarter itself as well. I think the numbers at direct-to-consumer were better than many had anticipated. They would be for the company. Let me just look here. Yeah. EBITDA was $409 million. That was a beat for many analysts. Direct studio EBITDA also actually was a bit of a beat. But again, it is that I think that investors are keying off of, because that's been the focus, as we know. By the way, linear cable networks, not quite as strong. In particular, in their shareholder letter, they do call out particular weakness in the advertising environment, saying the U.S. linear television advertising market has deteriorated faster than we expected, as evidenced by our results over the last several quarters. But that is being outweighed on the positive side by that DTC, both the numbers themselves and the guidance.
Okay, so given the debt pay down, in 2.5 years they paid down $20 billion, down to $34 billion. At what point would the valuation, say, of the studio, separate from the TV assets, come clear? When would people realize, wow, this may be a gem? Would they
well, when you say studio, you mean streaming?
Yes.
Yeah. That's
because if you look at an Apple show, the Apple shows are all
as you start to pay down debt, and as you really show an increasing level of EBITDA at streaming and the ability to continue to add customers and subscribers, you may start to get a bit of a higher multiple.
Do you think that's what's going on today?
A little bit. And don't forget, now it's already coming off a little bit, but the company has also put itself in a position through internal restructuring that was not insignificant to split at some point in not a dissimilar way that our company is splitting into its cable networks, mostly, except for Bravo and all the others. And what's left, basically Peacock and the studio, although NBC as well. So yeah, Jim, I think that is certainly a possibility. You're going to get investors more focused on that. Linear is still, as we know, an issue, and the question just becomes how quickly. And I think the advertising environment's not adding to a lot of optimism around that.
But
at least
the number
as
of
reported
the additions are superior to Disney.
Yeah, I believe they were. Yeah. I mean, nobody beats Netflix. Those numbers from the last quarter, I've said this a number of times, were astounding, the subscriber additions. Yes, most of them were international, but even domestically, the numbers from Netflix were simply game, set, match in some way. And sure, your Disney are fighting for that number 2 position. Amazon we kind of put aside because it's just not a core business, even though they do compete strongly. But take a look at Netflix. Look what that stock's done over the last 3 years, not even, but you can see over 5 years. And it's just crushed them all.
Well, let me posit something, David. Would an Amazon, which is fooling around with James Bond, would ever just say, you know what, we want to own the best studio, the biggest studio on earth. We'll just write a check. Would they ever do something?
I don't know is the answer. I don't know. Certainly there has been a view that from an antitrust perspective in the past, no way. Things are different now. And I don't know, Jim. I mean, you can't rule it out as a possibility. I would argue that if Amazon were to ever come at Warner Brothers Discovery and say, we want it, I think there would be a very happy conversation. I just don't know that will ever actually occur.
Thank
it's not
you.
clear. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Paramount, by the way, shares are down. Don't forget, it's getting bought. That deal, I mean, we're getting closer and closer to the potential close there. But the numbers on Paramount, they added 5.6 million streaming subs. Revenues were up 16%. But again, of course, you're seeing more pressure on the linear cable networks. It's going to be very different, though, for SpinCo. We are going to be a powerhouse, an absolute powerhouse, commanding by far the highest multiple in the group, given you. We got you.
Oh, jeez, dude.
Can you get this? You're missing it. There it is.
I feel like Jack Benny. Remember, does anyone know Jack?
Rochester.
Anyway, thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And we have Carl
for that
Quintanilla as well.
gratuitous mention.
So I notice he never really speaks when we're talking about SpinCo, but he can talk now.
How's MS doing?
Yeah.
That's what they're all wondering. How's MS?
Jim, we're gonna watch obviously the Tesla, Palantir, AppLovin universe.
Yeah, all
and
back.
whether these momentum longs
And whether
can
it's Bitcoin,
live another day, right?
Right. And is it Bitcoin? Is it the GE Vernova piece out today? Is there a quantum Amazon piece? I mean,
What was that AppLovin thing yesterday with those two
that was
short reports?
two reports saying that it's just outright fraud.
Panda Bear loves, I don't know what was going
Blue
on.
Horseshoe,
there, man.
there's Anacott Copper. I mean, those two reports were so negative that I chose to not actually say the charges because
I'm glad we didn't, and I don't necessarily think we didn't know either one of them. Didn't even know if they were connected to each other, frankly.
Right, and look, the EBITDA is there, but if you say, listen, they inserted themselves when they shouldn't have.
I mean, AppLovin is an enormous company, still at $112 billion. As I pointed out a number of times, it made the performance. I mean, a firm like Jericho, a very, very well-regarded hedge fund owned by Josh Resnick. I mean, my God, the year that this thing had, you can see still. But yesterday's decline was significant, even though we really don't understand or know who those people are.
I know. I mean, look, they did find a way to be able to get people, gamers, to place advertising. Anyone who can place advertising. David, you raised a great point. Linear advertising going down. So what do? Does that mean fewer people advertising? No. You have an oddity placing ads on Instagram. You've got a lot of TikTok. And you might want to work with AppLovin. Because you can get people you couldn't get otherwise. But the charges that were made were scurrilous. How about that? They were scurrilous charges.
Right. Wow,
That's
what?
it?
I got nothing else. I don't want to really give a lot of voice to them because I just don't know who they were.
I didn't know who Fuzzy was a bear.
Fuzzy Bear was.
Fuzzy was a bear. Thank you.
We do have other consumer names to watch. Norwegian, for example, was up in the pre-market at least, Jim.
Yeah, look, I think Norwegian, again, the forecast was not as robust as they could have done. They could have easily said, look, things are really good. Royal's doing incredibly well. I think they're doing well. One that I think you want to watch is Smucker. Smucker had fantastic Uncrustables numbers, okay? But then they had not so great the Hostess numbers, and you can see it's a tug of war between how great Uncrustables is and whether they can get this Twinkie acquisition that they made together. And it is interesting to see a company that has a product that has set the world on fire, which is Uncrustables. I don't use them, but I know the NFL likes Uncrustables. I mean, what's so funny?
The NFL likes oh yeah, that's right. There was those reports about how many Uncrustables they go through.
I thought it was good. They probably are at the combine. Let's go to the combine. See if they're eating a lot of Uncrustables.
We're already talking about the NFL again. It just finished. Can't we just give it a break?
Well, you want NFL? I'll do NBA weeknights. Do you want to do that?
Sure.
How's that going?
Ratings are not great.
Must be the
NBA ratings.
Must be the Sixers.
I watched them last night. I was at the game actually. They put up a fight.
They did?
Yeah, they did.
If they had real people, they could really do a fight. How about Constellation Brands? We didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, we'll downgrade today, right?
There's two constellations. There's the good constellation and the bad constellation.
Good constellation is the power
Energy.
company.
And by the way, Constellation Brands, not only, it's like a parade of horribles. I mean, we know that beer's unhealthy. We know there's cannabis. But they have Mexican beer. And the company famously kept saying to me, the president is not going to tariff Mexican beer. You can't make Mexican beer in America. Well, I don't think the president's all that nuanced about these tariffs.
Structural decline. When a company says it's structural, that's not good.
Structural is a bad word. Structural is very bad. Very, very bad.
What is going on? Why people just stop drinking beer?
They cut back dramatically. Look, David, although Bud had better numbers, but people thought Bud's numbers would be really bad. But the decline in beers. When I had I had Texas Roadhouse on, and when their hottest drink is a mocktail, I mean a mocktail. I'm talking mocktail. What? Mocktail.
I know. I don't want to live in a country where people aren't drinking.
Well, you better go to another country. Hey, you ever see the
UK, man? They hit it hard.
You ever see the degree I have in beer pouring from Guinness in Dublin?
Yeah.
What's amazing is that, like the cannabis ETF, MSOS, it's not like that's making up for any loss.
Not at all. No one's making any money.
I'm not moving to that either.
No, the stoners aren't making money. Beer's not making any money.
Hard liquor?
Hard liquor's
not
horrible.
horrible.
Oh, my God, the Browns. People talk about the Browns. They're down so much. By the way, people think agave's doing okay, but that's just because it's not being crushed like everything else.
I gotta pile on the tequila right now. I got to go after the show.
It's going to go up big.
It's going up.
Agave prices
You've made
are
the
going
point
up big.
many times. I don't know how much of this is related to GLP-1s. Now, people who are on them obviously cut back on their intake of food, but also of alcohol. There's no doubt about it. I'm sure you hear it.
No,
I hear it from
at
people
Bar
who are
San
on
Miguel,
them.
my old bar.
I don't want more than a drink, if that. Yeah.
The numbers are just incredible. People just have shifted to food. What it really is they want one beer instead of two.
Yes.
They want, instead of having two margis, they'll have one margi. And that's the big change. It's moderation. And that is amazing because we've never seen moderation. We've seen people just drink more and more and more, and then the prices went up very big. None of these liquor companies is willing to cut price. I don't know why they're not. They'll all break one day. They're just going to break. They'll break. They'll break.
We'll see. We'll see whether we get some promotions. Certainly, tariffs are a big part of that business. And by the way, Eamon Javers has some more on what the president did post this morning. Hey, Eamon.
Yeah, Carl, a lot of attention to the president's post on social media this morning about Canada and Mexico tariffs going into effect on March 4th. What we're told here at the White House is that the president is frustrated with the pace of action on fentanyl, and he is saying that on March 4th he is going to impose those tariffs that he had put on pause 30 days ago. That 30-day deadline is March 4th. He is saying those will now go through. We are able to report that there is some negotiation ongoing over the State Department today over that with the Mexican delegation and the U.S., but still the president here signaling that might be a futile effort given that he is intending to put those tariffs in place on March 4th. Also some, questions here about what the president meant when he said in his social media post, China will likewise be charged an additional 10% tariff on that date. The question is, the president already put 10% tariffs on China earlier this year. Did he mean that he was going to make sure that that stayed in effect, or did he mean an additional 10% for a total of 20% tariffs on China? I've been talking to some White House officials here in the building. They say the president means an additional 10% tariff on China. So the 10% from earlier this year, plus now an additional 10% for a total tariff rate of 20% on all products coming to the United States from China across the board. Again, the reasoning I'm given here is that the president is frustrated with the pace of change or lack thereof on fentanyl sales in the United States. He feels that Chinese could do more. They're not doing it, and therefore he has decided to increase the tariff on China to 20%. So that might have an impact on a whole range of prices of American importers dealing with Chinese goods. Guys, back over to you.
If there is clarification, Eamon, it wouldn't be the first time this week. Yesterday, EPA had to come out and clarify his comments about cutting staff versus spending. It was actually more like 60% of spending, not staff.
Right. So, and then yesterday we had this question about, there was some question about whether Canada and Mexico were being extended to April 2nd or that was still March 4th. So there's a lot of plates spinning on a lot of sticks here at the White House in terms of these tariffs and a lot of deadlines. And so it's easy to get confused. But where it stands right now is Canada and Mexico deadline is March 4th. The president signaling in the social media post this morning that he intends to go through with that on March 4th because of his frustration around fentanyl. This new tariff now of an additional 10% for a total of 20 on China. And then we've got that April 1st and 2nd timeline. April 1st is when this report is due to the White House in terms of a study of reciprocal tariffs with basically everybody else on planet Earth. April 2nd is the first day on which he could implement tariffs based on that report. So the president is saying in this social media post this morning, he does intend to do reciprocal tariffs starting on April 2nd. What those are, which countries they apply to, what the rates are and numbers are, all of that still TBD, but we definitely have two sets of deadlines now, March 4th and April 2nd.
Eamon, thank you. Eamon Javers, a busy day. We'll get Starmer at the White House as well. As we go to break, watch bonds. This news from Schmidt of the Fed today saying, and we quote, discussions with contacts in my district, as well as some recent data, suggest that elevated uncertainty might weigh on growth, moving bonds a little bit, 10-year 4.28. NASDAQ's given up the opening gains. NVIDIA's down about 1%. We're back in a moment.
Changemakers.
Let's get to Jim and stop trading.
Yeah, we've got CrowdStrike puts out a report every year about the cyber threats. And this one, they talk about North Koreans coming into companies, actually posing as employees, taking data. And it sounds very much like, as I said, George, the Manchurian Candidate. They're masquerading as American employees. Another big threat. God, this market's so bad since the tariff news. But anyway, I think CrowdStrike is, I mentioned it because cyber is the one area that they can't seem to tax. Because there's nothing to tax.
The North Koreans, I think they were behind potentially that huge crypto.
Oh, the
$1.5
$1.4 billion.
for Bybit. Yeah.
They're masquerading as us, so be very careful if you're at a company, because for remote, you don't know that the person's actually working for the North Korean state, which is, I think, pretty horrible, but that's what they're doing. And tonight I've got Bank of New York, a bit of a rebranding, and then Martin Marietta Materials. They make rocks. I wonder if rocks could be a tariff. You can't tariff rocks from Georgia to Florida, can you?
No, not from there. Not
there you
from there,
go.
But if the rocks come from somewhere else, you certainly can.
These are smart rocks.
I think obviously an important addition of news there from Eamon for the marketplace, Carl.
No, it crushed the market.
When I think we all saw that
crushed the
10%, it was
market.
unclear. It was like, because you knew that had happened, the 10% on China. So now we're talking 20%.
I just think
And
it's
you know,
just
minimal
ghastly.
discussion of carve-outs, Jim, either by sector or company so far.
No, I mean,
despite
that's what-
every attempt by corporates to get in his good graces.
I mean, I did think the Constellation was going to have that because of the agave issue.
20% tariff on an iPhone could be pretty
Well,
substantial.
that's why
man.
Apple went down very badly yesterday. So people said, well, wait a second. They paid $500 billion expansion plan, but the fact is that if Taiwan is suddenly asked to be able to pay its fair way, or if we slap something on China, well, I mean, does that apply to Apple? I mean, it's a fraught moment, and I don't want anyone to think that we're minimizing. It's a very fraught moment because the president is in accelerated computing mode on tariffs.
He's adding all sorts of Blackwells to his compute
When
power.
does he become the singularity?
I don't know.
Inference mode.
Between, yes, pre-train and post-train, and I don't know. I mean, look, I try to be constructive about this stuff. Last night I couldn't be because I said, look, these are great American companies and they have no idea what the hell they're doing. They don't know what to do.
It's the uncertainty, I think, that is the key.
Yeah, they just don't know what to do. If you're Mary Barra, what do you do? Like, do you just stop making cars? Do you figure it out?
All right, that's why, as Leisman said, we'll watch business spending. Jim, we'll see you tonight. Important
Absolutely.
day.
Thank you.
S&P goes red. Dollar index back above 107 to speak of this discussion about tariffs. And we'll continue to watch NVIDIA, now down about 3%. Don't go anywhere.
Trong video ngày hôm nay, chúng ta có những cập nhật thú vị về sự thay đổi của thế giới theo hướng RISC-V của Trung Quốc khi nước này từ bỏ ARM trong ngành công nghiệp chip. Có một công ty hấp dẫn có ảnh hưởng tuyệt đối đến thị trường chip di động mặc dù không tự sản xuất chip. Công ty này là ARM, một công ty thiết kế kiến trúc chip. Kiến trúc chip đóng vai trò là nền tảng cho chip và ARM phát triển kiến trúc chip cho các nhà sản xuất thiết kế chip để đổi lấy phí. Trong nhiều thập kỷ, ARM đã nắm giữ vững chắc hơn 90% thị trường chip di động thông qua mô hình.
Good Thursday morning. Welcome to another hour of Squawk on the Street. I'm Sarah Eisen with Carl Quintanilla and David Faber live as always from post night of the New York Stock Exchange. Stocks started off higher, then we took a leg lower after President Trump announced new tariffs on China. We'll talk about that in a moment, but we've got negative on the S&P 500 for the day, down 1/3% right now. Tech is getting hit the hardest, down 1.4%. It doesn't help that Nvidia is down 4%, Salesforce down 4%, Supermicro down 11.5%. Those are earning stories, but the overall market did seem to shift in terms of momentum. NASDAQ getting hit the hardest on those tech losers, down a little more than 1%. The Dow remains higher just barely. We'll talk about some of the media names that are higher as well. Warner Brothers Discovery at the top of the market today for a change, up 7%. Treasuries got a lot of economic data to digest, to talk about. We're seeing some selling of bonds, and that pushes yields a little higher, but we're still talking about sub 4.3 levels on the 10-year right now. The 2-year yield just below 4.1. We are 30 minutes here into the trading session. Here are three big movers we're watching. AI bellwether Nvidia reporting a top and bottom line beat. Sales up 78% from last year. Solid revenue guidance as well for the current quarter, but there are concerns about margins ahead. We're going to get to the street's reaction in just a moment. Salesforce, as mentioned, also under pressure. Earnings beat estimates, but revenue fell short. Guidance came in a little bit lighter than expected. And another morning of consumer results, from retailers to cruise lines to packaged food, all moving in opposite directions. And I'll share some of the commentary in a bit about what they're all saying about the consumer right now.
In the meantime, let's get some pending home numbers. Diana Olick's got that for us. Morning, Diana.
Good morning, Carl. Pending home sales in January fell 4.6% month to month to the lowest level ever, or since the National Association of Realtors began tracking this in 2001. That is a big miss. The street was looking for a 1% drop. Sales down 5.2% year over year. Now, this count is based on signed contracts, so it's people out shopping in January when mortgage rates were well over 7% for the entire month. These sales are an indicator of future closed sales. The realtors did mention exceptionally cold weather as a possible deterrent to buyers, but sales actually rose slightly in the Northeast, and they were down in the West, where weather was less of a factor. Sales fell the hardest in the South, which had been the most active region of the country for sales. Now, this drop comes as inventories are significantly higher than they were a year ago, but affordability is taking its toll. Home prices have been easing over the past few months in some areas, but they're still higher than they were a year ago nationally. Consumer sentiment is also dropping, which could be weighing on buyers as well. Sarah?
Okay, thank you, Diana. Just want to show you the sort of intraday chart of the market here, and you can see the moment where the market fell as the stock market began to digest what President Trump had just posted on Truth Social. So the morning post on tariffs. So he's still talking about drugs. He says they're pouring into our country from Mexico and Canada at very high and unacceptable levels. And then he goes through some of the timeline here of when tariffs are going to go into effect. On Mexico and Canada, he says we can not allow this scourge to continue to harm the U.S. Therefore, until it stops or is seriously limited, the proposed tariff scheduled to go into effect on March 4th will indeed go into effect as scheduled. He also adds China will likewise be charged an additional 10% tariff on that date. And then he adds the April 2nd reciprocal tariff date will remain in full force and effect. Thank you for your attention to this matter. God bless America. The upshot, we're going to get an extra 10% tariffs on China.
I think, sir, there may have been just a bit of confusion around the 10%. Perhaps some people not, of course, realizing that had already been in effect. I don't know, but it was clarified by Eamon Javers as well. I did notice the market seemed to react once we got full clarification. Not that it wasn't somewhat clear, saying additional.
I think he said additional because remember the first 10%
we didn't see we had not seen initially when we began the reaction. And you see Nvidia shares, for example, turning around. We'll get to them in a minute, perhaps on this.
So remember, the first time around, he announced the Mexico, Canada, China tariffs. He delayed Mexico and Canada because they were negotiating over drugs. but he put in place the 10% on China.
Yes.
And so companies have already started to bake that into guidance. Bath & Body Works, I just spoke with their CEO, Gina Boswell, that's already in her guidance. Now they're going to have an additional 10% on China. And so that's going to be something for companies to figure out. It's all very fluid, but it helps to have the dates here. Still don't know exactly what the contours of the reciprocal tariffs are going to look like. I think that will be interesting. How are they going to deal with the VAT? How are they going to deal with things like sales taxes, which they seem to accuse countries of doing to counter products, to make it unfair for U.S. products coming in? That will be worth watching. Is it having an effect on the data? Maybe too soon to tell, but one thing that definitely is going to catch everybody's attention, including those folks at the Fed, is the jobless claims number. Elevated. The amount of Americans filing first-time unemployment claims last week did go up and it surged to an 11-week high, 242,000 last week. That was 21,000 above the 221 consensus and also a 22,000 increase in the amount of jobless claims than we got the week before. Also, it was noted, according to the Department of Labor, this wasn't California wildfires and it wasn't the federal government layoffs. So it could speak to some underlying weakness or confidence issues developing from companies. The biggest, for instance, Carl, increase in jobless claims, Kentucky, Tennessee, Washington, Michigan, and Minnesota. Biggest decrease was California, Pennsylvania. It could be linked to a slowdown in activity. 1 week does not a trend make. We're going to have to keep seeing it, but it's notable because there's been this big downtrend in jobless claims, which kind of made it feel like everything was okay in the labor market.
Yeah, interesting. People definitely dissecting the claims by state. We haven't really seen a spike in either Virginia or Maryland, which makes some wonder whether or not we're feeling yet the effects of any federal workforce layoffs. We'll see.
We'll see. I mean, they said that that's not really in it yet. I will note that today's data, and we got the second look at fourth quarter GDP as well. And usually that's it's old and it was unchanged, but what's in there, the details. One interesting point I'll just highlight. Core PCE in that fourth quarter data was revised higher. That's a little troubling. 2.7% now instead of 2.5 for core PCE. We'll get the PCE numbers for the last month tomorrow, which will be fresher. However, I highlight it, David, because it presents a little bit of a predicament. If the Fed wants to say, we're on hold because we want to make sure disinflation is happening, they can point to this and say, look, some of these numbers are being revised up. We don't want to lose track. But if they want to say we want to cut rates because the labor market is starting to show signs of cracks and weakening, they can look at jobless claims. Now, I'm not saying these two numbers necessarily are indicative of the trends, but they could be. And that will be the Fed's conflict, which is, are they going to care more about weakening jobs, or are they going to care more about lack of progress on disinflation? Hopefully, we'll continue to get strong jobs and we'll continue to get disinflation. But today's setup could be an interesting dilemma for the Fed.
Well, and then later on, I mean, they're coming close now. 20% tariffs on everything coming from China and 25% from Mexico and Canada. That's not exactly helping the inflation, helping the fight against inflation.
No, but the question is it a one-off inflationary price shock?
Right.
And is it something the Fed is going to have to respond to? I think a bigger question is, what does it do for demand? If it
right. You've been
raises
saying
prices
that
for the
lately,
consumer.
and a lot of people have said that for some time, sort of the one-time nature of it, but overall demand. So
Yeah.
what does it do for demand, Sarah?
What does it do for demand? It could hurt demand if we do get a price shock with a lower consumer confidence environment. So far, we're okay. I mean, Urban Outfitters today, customer demand has remained remarkably consistent. Although Smucker's, at the grocery store, not so much. We continue to not see a material impact to the category. They're talking about GLP-1s, by the way, on that. So I would guide you back to the comments around a more cautious consumer, the convenience channel being down in general. Gas prices have been elevated. People are just having a little bit less extra discretionary change in their pockets. I think that is clearly part of it. Papa John's, the environment is much more value focused at the moment. And Gina Boswell of Bath & Body Works just told me value-seeking consumer, although they feel good with the innovations they've had, so they haven't really seen a slowdown in that fact. The value-seeking consumer, David, layer on higher prices, and you do wonder, and already sort of slipping confidence, what that's going to do.
Yeah, I mean, none of this reflects tariffs at this point.
No.
Yeah.
Although I do wonder, some of the business decisions around hiring and costs, because it's just hard to know.
It's very hard to
I mentioned the word fluid. If you don't know ultimately what your cost structure is, it's hard to make decisions about investing.
Exactly.
And hiring.
Exactly. All right, let's turn to shares of NVIDIA this morning. They're turning lower. They were up in response to the quarter, but they did turn lower once the market, I think, started to really digest the potential prospects for 20% tariffs on imports from China. Here to help us break things down is D.A. Davidson's Gil Luria and Cantor Fitzgerald's C.J. Muse. Gil has a 135 price target. He's neutral on the stock. C.J.'s at $200, and as you might imagine, given that price target, as an overweight. Gil, let's start with you. Tariffs are making you look smart right now, but I wonder, what do you take away from the quarter that didn't give you perhaps more confidence in the stock and the performance in the future?
I actually don't think this has a lot to do with tariffs. The stock was already down also after the close yesterday, because this is as good as it gets for NVIDIA. Their big customers increased their spend the most into Q4 as they ever have and probably ever will. 2 of their 3 largest customers have said CapEx will be flat into the first half of the year. It's as good as it's going to get in terms of China. Whether or not tariffs matter, there will be more restrictions on sales of chips to China, so those sales are going to be under pressure. And then it's as good as it's going to get in terms of margins. With their current accelerated product introduction cycle, every time they get to 75% gross margins, a new product's going to drag it down back to the low 70s. So they've done phenomenally well. They're still doing well this year, but this is probably as good as it's going to get.
All right, good as it's going to get, says Gil. CJ, what's your response?
Yeah, I think it's a thoughtful view, but one that I completely disagree with. We are in the first stages of the Blackwell ramp. They were able to ship $11 billion in the quarter, or 1/3 of total data center revenues. And that's the fastest ramp in the company's history. I think very importantly, they are supply constrained. I think part of the gross margin miss is the fact that they have these supply chain issues. Also, pricing from TSMC went up on Jan 1, so they have to mitigate that. But if you think about this Blackwell product cycle, I think you're going to get a July quarter where you get a re-acceleration on the top line. And then we're going to go into Blackwell Ultra in the second half. And then we're going to have Rubin very quickly in the first half of 2026. So I think the data center growth story is robust. I think gross margins will push to 75% exiting the year. And as long as they continue to deliver more and more value, drive down the cost of compute, I think that enables AI to become more ubiquitous. Data center will grow again in 26. And the moment the market has conviction on that growth in 26, stock will continue to work.
Yeah, I notice you have a $6.80 earnings target for calendar year 26, but you say, and people can back into a multiple from there, but CJ, you say as well, clear upside to $8 or more when all is said and done. What does that mean, when all is said and done?
If you can get to the 300 billion kind of number for next year, that's where, we would underwrite that larger EPS number. But I think very importantly, if you believe in the 650 to 7, you're buying a stock now at less than 20 times next year's earnings, which I think is incredibly attractive. I would say, though, that the main question out there is just whether 26 will be a growth year or whether we will have a digestion year. And, I think we'll have visibility to that around the late May, June timeframe, given kind of 12+ month lead times for Blackwell. And so I think Computex Taiwan will be a very important kind of inflection point where I would expect Jensen will keynote again and that he will offer a view. And I think the moment the market kind of can underwrite another growth year is when the stock can work again. Because quite frankly, the report we got last night was basically in line with buy-side expectations. So what we want to see is that accelerating second derivative and really start to see upside to numbers. And, that's going to be the second half of 25 and into 2026.
Gil, what do you think about 26 in particular, as CJ just said? Growth year or digestion year?
It's far more likely that it's a digestion year. To get to CJ's number, you need to add $80 to $100 billion next year, with at least 2 of the customers already telling us they're probably at plateauing in terms of CapEx. Microsoft and Amazon have already said it. Google will probably say it by the middle of the year. So without their biggest customers increasing spend probably at all, it's very hard to see them adding 80 to $100 billion of revenue next year.
What about all the geopolitics, the fact that it's been such a sensitive sector and the Trump administration has picked up right where Biden left off in terms of restrictions and adding new ones on China? Gil, do you think that's a big problem or an overhang for the stock and part of the reason it hasn't really done much over the last 6 months?
It's a very big overhang. Jensen Huang visited the White House a couple of weeks ago, and we don't know what he promised. Usually when these CEOs have visited President Trump, they came back with a big announcement. Tim Cook with a big investment. Mark Zuckerberg added Dana White to the board. We don't know what Jensen Huang promised. We also know that there's already legislation that was coming for further restrictions on sales to China. This administration's more likely to be even more severe with those restrictions. And yet the company yesterday said their guidance and their expectations assumes no change to the regulation. So that will continue to be an overhang, at least until we know what the administration intends to do. Let's not forget, NVIDIA has taken the tack that we don't know how much we sell in China. We sell to our resellers in Singapore, and we don't know what they do after that. The Biden administration said that's unacceptable. It's hard to imagine the Trump administration is going to accept that type of approach, that they don't know who resellers are selling to, and therefore it's fine to sell into China.
Guys, going to leave it there. Appreciate both your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meantime, markets trying to find some stability here, even with the S&P still red. Sector-wise, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Financials and energy are both up a full percent, but technology down almost 1% is taking the wind out of some of that. We do have the VIX pretty much flat and the dollar index back above 107. The NASDAQ, by the way, remains negative for the year to date. We'll watch that. As we go to break, get a look at the roadmap for the rest of the hour. Growing backlash in Europe for Tesla and Elon Musk. Shares 40% off the recent highs. We'll discuss the challenges facing the company and Musk.
President Trump calling egg prices a disaster in his first cabinet meeting of the new term. We're going to get a fresh read from the ground from one of the nation's largest producers, Vital Farms.
And the secret tax break included in President Trump's $5 million gold card. We'll tell you all about it. Squawk on the Street. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
and make it count.
Welcome back. Sarah mentioned at the top of the hour, shares of Warner Brothers Discovery having a somewhat rare, very strong day, although well off the highs. The stock had been up as much as 11% in the very early going. Still a strong reaction to earnings, and it would seem the focus of investors is on the outperformance that its direct-to-consumer business, namely the Max service, which added 6.4 million subscribers during the quarter, posted an EBITDA number that was above the expectations of many of the analysts who follow the company. And we got guidance as well in the shareholder letter that accompanied earnings from Warner Brothers Discovery of about 1.3 billion in EBITDA for the full year from direct to consumer. That's a trajectory that investors like. Starting to show real progress there in terms of profitability, obviously something we've talked about for years now, and is being rewarded at least with that gain. Not so good on the linear cable side. Of course, that's nothing new, but the company did make a point of noting it's not just experiencing declines in the number of people who actually have linear cable subscriptions, but it's also the linear television advertising market, they say, has deteriorated faster than we expected, and they cite as evidence, of course, their results over the last several quarters. Nonetheless, a fairly strong showing for Warner Brothers Discovery, which also has paid down a significant amount of debt, Carl.
Indeed. Meantime, as we go to break, watch shares of Sweetgreen down 11 pre-market, actually turned positive after those double-digit declines before the bell. Revenue and comp sales were a miss. Loss was wider than expected. The full-year guidance also came in weak. Tesla, meantime, now down 25% on the year as investors work through Musk's growing obligations elsewhere. 288 is going to be awfully close to the 200-day for the first time in several months. We'll talk about the challenges facing Musk in a minute.
Cả khổng lồ chip toàn cầu, với giá hơn 30 tỷ đô la Mỹ 6 năm trước. Với việc Arm và Cancom bước vào một cuộc chiến pháp lý và một tài liệu vụ kiện bị lộ, các khách hàng lớn của Arm, bao gồm Cancom và Mediac, có thể phải đối mặt với tình huống họ phải lựa chọn giữa việc sử dụng bộ sản phẩm Arm hoàn chỉnh hoặc mua giấy phép kiến trúc để phát triển sản phẩm của mình. Chip riêng.
ETF Fund là một tài khoản tổng hợp đầu tư cổ phiếu trên thị trường Hoa Kỳ do anh Nguyễn Thanh Vũ, giám đốc điều hành công ty cổ phiếu NTV Financial Group trực tiếp trao đổi. Với chỉ tiêu 30% tiền lời mỗi năm, quý vị sẽ được chia tiền lời mỗi 3 tháng với số vốn đầu tư tối thiểu 5.000 Mỹ Kim. Quý vị sẽ được công ty bảo đảm 100% không bị mất vốn và có thể rút vốn về bất cứ lúc nào. Xin liên lạc trực tiếp với Trish Thùy Linh tại 949 524 9352 hoặc gọi về công ty 714 251 6036 để tham khảo.
Đây có phải là thời điểm thích hợp để mua cổ phiếu Alibaba? Trong video này, chúng ta sẽ tìm hiểu sâu hơn về Alibaba. Báo cáo ban đầu của chúng tôi đã được công bố trên trang web của chúng tôi vào thứ Sáu, ngày 22 tháng 12, 2023 và bây giờ chúng tôi ở đây để cung cấp cho bạn một phân tích toàn diện hơn nữa. Hãy nhớ đăng ký, nhấn nút thích và bật chuông thông báo để được thông báo về nhất của chúng tôi. Xem luôn cập nhật về mọi phát triển quan trọng có thể ảnh hưởng đến khoản đầu tư của bạn. Nâng cao quyết định giao dịch của bạn bằng công cụ phân tích cổ phiếu AI mới ra mắt của chúng tôi được cung cấp bởi GPT-4A tại Stock. Đầu tư cho chúng tôi khai thác sức mạnh của AI và nhận dự đoán giá miễn phí cũng như phân tích chuyên sâu cho bất kỳ công ty nào trong số 25 trên toàn thế giới hiện nay. Xin lưu ý rằng video này chỉ nhằm mục đích cung cấp thông tin và không được là lời khuyên tài chính. Tính đến ngày 21 tháng 12, 2023, hệ thống của chúng tôi đã xếp hạng Alibaba là một tổ chức chặt là 024. Bây giờ chúng ta hãy đi sâu vào hiệu suất của cổ phiếu trong giai đoạn này. Bất chấp một số biến động, cổ phiếu hiện đang bị lỗ 19 kể từ khuyến nghị tích lũy nắm giữ ban đầu của chúng tôi. Điều này có nghĩa là trung bình giảm với tốc độ 0,6 mỗi ngày kể từ khi nó được liệt vào danh sách tích lũy nắm giữ. Hiện tại, cổ phiếu đang trong xu hướng giảm đáng kể trong ngắn hạn, cho thấy khả năng giảm thêm. Nhìn vào xu hướng 3 tháng, có thể có mức giảm âm 1.579 3 tháng tới. Điều này cho thấy mức lợi nhuận có thể sẽ nằm trong khoảng từ âm 22.59 đến âm 9.60. Xem xét xu 2 tháng, dự kiến có sự thay đổi 140 năm tới. Điều này cho thấy lợi tiềm năng nằm trong khoảng âm 24.52 đến 5.72. Nói cách khác, cổ phiếu có thể được định giá từ 56,82 đô la đến 70,59 đô la sau 12 tháng. Bản cập nhật của chúng tôi về Alibaba đưa ra đánh giá chính về việc cổ phiếu Alibaba bị hạ hàng sau phiên giao dịch cuối cùng. Giá cổ phiếu của Alibaba đã giảm xuống mức 1,29 vào ngày cuối cùng, tức là thứ Sáu, ngày 22/2023 tháng 12. Nó giảm từ 76 đô la 26 xu xuống còn 75 đô la 28 xu. Trong suốt ngày giao dịch, cổ phiếu thể hiện sự dao động của 1,67 với mức thấp nhất là 74.44 và mức cao nhất là 75.68. Trong 10 ngày qua, giá đã tăng 6 lần, dẫn đến mức tăng 4,35. Trong 2 tuần qua, khối lượng cổ phiếu giao dịch giảm cùng với cổ phiếu. Đây thực sự là một dấu hiệu tích cực vì khối lượng sẽ phù hợp với diễn biến của cổ phiếu. Cụ thể, khối lượng giao dịch đã giảm 795 không cổ phiếu vào ngày cuối cùng và tổng cộng 20 triệu cổ phiếu đã được mua và bán, trị giá khoảng 150 tỷ USD, khoảng thời gian 52 tuần. Giá cao nhất được ghi nhận của cổ phiếu là 121,30 đô la trong khi mức thấp nhất là 79 đô la. Hiện tại, giá là 37,94 hay 46,2 đô la dưới mức cao nhất trong 52 tuần. Ngoài ra, nó là 76,42 hay 44 đô la, thấp hơn mức cao của UH 2020 tháng 10 khi giá đạt tới 312 này. Hãy nói về xếp hạng của nhà phân tích cho Alibaba Group Holding Limited, được gọi là Alibaba, vào thứ Sáu, ngày 1 tháng 12. 1223 Morgan Stanley đã xếp hạng Alibaba U bằng hành động hạ cấp. Vào thứ Sáu, ngày 17 tháng 11, 2023 điểm chuẩn cũng đã cho Alibaba xếp hạng nhưng với một hành động giữ lại. Tương tự, cùng ngày, công ty chứng khoán Mizuho xếp hạng Alibaba ở mức nên mua ở mức giữ. Morgan Stanley một lần nữa cho Alibaba mức thừa cân nhưng với quyết định giữ lại. Quay trở lại ngày thứ Ba, 2023 điểm chuẩn đã đánh giá Alibaba là một cổ phiếu nên mua với hành động nắm giữ. Cả phân tích đánh giá cổ phiếu Alibaba là một cổ phiếu nên mua, cho thấy triển vọng tích cực. Họ coi tỷ lệ PE và tệ giá trên sổ sách là những chỉ báo mua, hỗ trợ thêm cho tâm lý tích cực. Tuy nhiên, về lợi tức đầu tư, các nhà phân tích đã xếp hạng trung lập cho cổ phiếu này cho cách tiếp cận thận trọng hơn. Hôm nay chúng ta sẽ thảo luận về các tín hiệu dành cho Alibaba, một trong những công ty hàng đầu trên thị trường. Hãy bắt đầu với những đức tích cực. Tín hiệu mua được đưa ra từ điểm đáy xoay vào thứ Hai, ngày 11 tháng 12, 2023 và kể từ đó cổ phiếu đã tăng 5,48. Điều này cho thấy tiềm năng tăng thêm cho đến khi tìm thấy trục xoay trên cùng mới. Ngoài ra, có tín hiệu mua từ đường MACD phân kỳ hội tụ trung bình động 3 tháng. Tuy nhiên, chúng tôi cũng có một số tín hiệu tiêu cực cần xem xét. Những tín hiệu này có thể có ảnh hưởng nhất định đến diễn biến ngắn hạn của cổ phiếu. Trong khi cổ phiếu Alibaba có tín hiệu mua từ đường trung bình động ngắn hạn thì đường trung bình dài hạn lại có tín hiệu bán chung. Thực tế là mức trung bình dài hạn cao hơn mức trung hạn, đưa ra dự báo tiêu cực hơn cho cổ phiếu. Nếu cổ phiếu tiếp tục tăng giá, nó sẽ đối mặt với ngưỡng kháng cự từ đường
now, and also whether those export restrictions themselves are actually working, or if software workarounds like DeepSeek are evidence that they don't. Here's some of what he said.
Our percentage revenues in China before export controls is twice as high as it is now. There's a fair amount of competition in China. Export control and otherwise, Huawei, other companies are quite rigorous and very, very competitive. And so I think that ultimately software finds a way. Maybe that's the easiest way of thinking about it.
David, a little Jurassic Park reference there, perhaps.
Yeah, I get it. right? Life finds a way. You know, John, on the tariff issue, I mean, you brought into focus, I think, the correct one, which is will the restrictions on low-end chips continue or even go even lower, because it's not as though they're importing a lot from China. Obviously, their manufacturing capacity is largely in Taiwan.
Right.
I mean, do we think that's fair, though, to say that is and how much of a concern that is for him?
Well, it doesn't seem to be that big a concern in the sense that China revenue, what they're projecting, what they're guiding to, is that the percentage of revenue coming from China is going to be stable. Part of what he was saying is that before there were these restrictions, the percentage revenue coming out of China was twice what it is now. And of course, NVIDIA said that they're going to abide by whatever export restrictions. But if you zoom out a little bit, something else coming out of China, not tariff affected, is DeepSeek. And NVIDIA stock did get impacted when the initial news of that model out of China came out. And there's been a lot of talk. The initial assumption was, boy, DeepSeek can run on lower end AI-related hardware. So is that bad for a producer of premium hardware or premium systems like NVIDIA? And really, Jensen argued the opposite, that because DeepSeek is based on breaking down these problems, AI-related, into smaller pieces and reasoning through them in the longer term, that could mean more demand for compute resources. Here's what he said about that.
We're just at the beginning of the reasoning AI era. This is the time when AI is thinking to itself before it answers a question. Instead of just immediately generating an answer, it'll reason about it, maybe break it down step by step. It'll do maybe some searching in its own mind before it creates and composes a smart answer for you.
And I might argue, David, that we saw a piece of, it's not exactly apples to apples, but Andy Jassy was in town yesterday with the launch of Amazon Alexa Plus, and Alexa working differently now, pulling on different models from across the spectrum to answer questions. And it's conversational. It's more breaking things down piece by piece and how it responds. The argument being, well, if this works better, if it's more conversation, people are going to talk to it more. They're going to use more AI resources. And if NVIDIA is more powerful and more efficient, then NVIDIA ends up being in higher demand, David.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of potential competitors when it comes to inference in particular. John, do you think, based on your own knowledge/reporting as well, that any of them have a real chance here in terms of taking significant share?
Well, it's hard to count anybody out because we're not just talking about hardware innovation here. We're also talking about software innovation. And part of what NVIDIA has in its CUDA software and platform is backward compatibility with earlier versions of chips that they've come out with. And if you think about it this way, it sort of allows, how you got an old iPhone, you might hand it down to your kids, and maybe they aren't using it for the same higher end type work things that you were using it for when you first got it. Maybe they're playing games on it, but it's still good enough for that. Well, that happens in data centers too, right? Companies might start off using these things for AI, but then as the systems get older, they still need them for video processing, things like that. So they hold on to them, keep them. It's still useful. And so it's useful for them to stay within an NVIDIA ecosystem. That being the case, if the performance is valuable, if there's a longer valuable life of the systems, and they've got this software underpinning, it could create a moat similar to what we've seen in the consumer world with Apple and iOS. We'll see.
All right. Good stuff, John. Really valuable to have his commentary right after the release. John Fort. Still to come. Struggled to buy eggs lately, like all of us, or find them, but at much higher prices. President Trump weighed in on the topic yesterday at his first cabinet meeting of the new administration. Listen.
We have to get the prices down, not the inflation down, the prices of eggs and various other things. Eggs are a disaster.
We'll get a fresh read from the ground with the CEO of one of the nation's biggest egg producers, Vital Farms, next.